Marcel, and this is a preview of my new book, The Curse of Balar. This is a collection of 13 interconnected short stories set in a cursed and fictional town in the Carpathian Mountains. Those of you that follow along on my blog and socials will know that these stories sprang from another project I'm working on. More on that at a later date. Right now, I'm going to read one of those stories in full. I agonized over which one to read, as they are in a deliberate order and so on, but eventually I settled on the third story, Midnight. Just a tiny bit of background to start. The year is 1895, and all is not well in the mysterious town of Balar. In the first story, a young noble with some connection to the illuminated church is killed. This has attracted Rome's attention, and they have subsequently dispatched an emissary to investigate what evil lurks in the town. The powers that be cannot risk the church's involvement for reasons that will become clear later, and have thus set an ambush for said emissary. In the second story, a grave robber named Cutter blabs this to some shady friends of his. They decide to set up an ambush of their own to collect the valuables. This is where our story begins. 4 strangers make their way by carriage to Balar. One of them is the doomed emissary. Midnight. The stagecoach rocked and squealed on its leather thoroughbraces as it made its way up the steep switchbacks to Balar. Every bump and lurch rattled through the carriage and up Lenora Vinlander's spine. Injuries, some old and fading, some new and biting, made their existence known like a yapping dog. An uncomfortable crick in her spine, the throbbing ache of a near-healed rib, and a myriad of burning cuts and concealed bruises sung a symphony of pain. She fought to conceal a wince and maintain her air of ladylike calm and indifference. She had no wish to reveal any detail about herself to the other 3 passengers. They were a strange bunch, to be sure. She was not here for them. 3 men. 4 if you counted the Italian driving the coach. It was difficult not to, as he occasionally made his presence known with a full-chested expletive in his native tongue. Whether he was upset with the conditions of the road, the behavior of the horses, or the encroaching darkness, it was hard to say. The flickering lanterns on either side of the coach banged on the frame as they meandered onwards through the dark. They cast slashes of yellow light through the flapping blinds and intermittently illuminated the passengers. She shifted in her seat, but there was no position that would give her comfort. The steadily increasing incline was certainly not helping. She had to brace herself against the seat on the side to stop herself from ending up in the lap of the man in front of her. The swaying light glinted off his spectacles. An odd little man, to be sure. He had an ill-kept silver moustache and a mess of salt and pepper hair. The latter was in this state due to his habit of pulling his hair while he incessantly scribbled notes. It was now too dark and too unsteady for anything of the sort. As such, his small lap desk, sheets, and fine fountain pen, silver-tipped no less, were neatly arranged on his lap. He seemed uncomfortable, knees together, hands clutching his belongings. His eyes were clenched shut behind those glinting spectacles. He had told her that he was one Dr. Morton Shaw, English by all accounts. He had been particular in pointing out that he was not a medical doctor, but rather vague on what kind he actually was. The man beside him filled the creaking coach with a constant stream of whispered prayer. He was dressed in the sombre purple vestments and white collar that marked him as a priest of the illuminated church. He clutched a fine golden pendant in the shape of a sun, 7 holy rays reaching out in fine golden filigree. His fingers read these fine engravings on his holy symbol, not a simple thing by any means, which told her that he was no simple priest. Thus far he had kept his name and his reason for travelling to Balar to himself. The third passenger, the one next to her, was a flamboyantly dressed gentleman with a curling mass of blonde beard. His round cheeks glistened with sweat, and his white knuckles clung to the meagre leather strap that was secured to the roof of the carriage. He had been the jolliest and chattiest of the 4 when the journey commenced several hours before. He was a collector of languages and, as she discovered, droll anecdotes. The humor of most of these little tales evidently did not survive translation. His attempts at conversation had steadily evaporated as the coach clattered into the unstable gloom. Frederick Hartmann, perhaps the friendliest German she had ever met, certainly the most colorful. She, on the other hand, opted for her customary black on black. Well, her dress was actually midnight blue, but who could tell in this gloom? Everything else was a definite shade of black, from her gloves to her boots to the handles of various concealed blades. She shifted in her seat again as the concealed throwing knives worked into her undergarments, jabbed into her ribcage. She tried to distract herself by turning her black walking stick around and around, making the silver head, which was shaped like the head of a lynx, turn and turn. Well, a walking stick to everyone else. To her it was extra security. Above them, the driver broke out into song. The tune was vaguely familiar, but the man's penchant for improvisations and bouts of humming made it a challenge to identify. "Has anyone been to Balar before?" asked Dr. Shaw. He spoke in French, a tongue they had established as their lingua franca. "Only in readings, my friend," said the German. His full-bodied tenor of a voice was somewhat subdued by his evident motion sickness. "Some archaeologically significant sites in the area, I believe. Underground caverns, mines, ruins, and so forth. And, of course, a rare dialect of the Romany language that seems to be—" He gripped the handhold, swallowed, and took a few breaths. "What was I saying?" "I too have read of it," said the priest, taking a brief respite from his constant prayer. "But in official church documentation, so to speak, the town is said to have an impressive cathedral, I understand." The doctor pushed up his glasses. "A cathedral, you say? Does it not make it a city?" The priest shrugged. He tried to find the words. "Perhaps I am not saying it correctly. Balar is a town, that is what I know. The religious structure, by the light we are cleansed, dates back to the founding of the town." He waved a hand. "Let me not bore you with such things." "No, no, mon père," said the bespectacled man. He had to raise his voice slightly to be heard over the clatter of wheels, the clop of hooves, and the driver's inane singing. "We have nothing better to fill the air with. I implore you, continue." The priest nodded. "Well, the cathedral houses many old carvings, religious and otherwise. They are considered relics by the Father Church. Cultural relics, to be sure." "I see. Is it for that reason that you make your pilgrimage to Balar, mon père?" "No, but I hope to see them all the same. There are matters that the Church wishes me to investigate. Perhaps I will not have the time." The carriage hit a stone. The subsequent rocking plunged the priest into silence. In the darkness, he clutched the pendant to his chest. Lenora hoped that this would bring an end to the conversation, but the doctor turned to her. "And you, madame, if I may be so forward." He said it as if it was too much to presume her the female of the species. "Why are you trekking to such a far-away place?" "Mademoiselle, or miss, not madame," she said. She said this in English for his benefit. "I have never been married," she sighed. Perhaps this came off as too unfriendly. She pressed on before he could continue. "I have not read or heard of this Balar," she said, switching back to French. "However, a friend of mine, perhaps it's better to say old acquaintance rather than friend, resides there. It is time that I pay him a visit now that I have the time. They may have the answers I seek." That would have to do, she thought. Better to turn the tables. "And you, doctor?" He nodded. "I travel there for work," he said. "A patron of the arts and sciences wishes to invest in my work. I shall not bore you with the details. I, too, have never been to Balar. I've never been this far east, in fact. All I know about this town is what I could gather along the way. I do not have Herr Hartmann's gift of tongues, so I fear some of it may have been muddled in translation." "Newcomers all," she said softly. "Perhaps we should form an accord," said the German, this Herr Hartmann. "If the town is too foreign and strange, perhaps we should find each other and keep each other company with—" The carriage lurched again, interrupting him. The light is the only ally we require, said the priest, by way of refusal. This brought an end to the conversation for the time being. They listened to the rattling of the carriage and the driver's painful tones. The incline seemed to even out slightly. Through the gaps in the window blinds, they could see the flash of tree trunks on either side. Beyond them, there was only darkness, for the lamps could only light so far. The doctor cleared his throat as if he was about to embark on another attempt at conversation. But alas, a noise above the clatter of hooves and rolling wheels robbed him of the chance. One of the horses whinnied and there was a sudden jolt. Every passenger had to hold on to something. Another horse whinnied. The next jolt made everyone lose their seats. One of the outside lanterns shattered. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, a crack like the snapping of wood sounded once, twice, and more. Something thudded against the roof of the coach. Something thudded onto the ground beside the coach. An item of luggage had fallen. There was a sudden groan, and the coach crashed to one side, losing the wheels on the right hand. The vehicle skidded to a stop in a shower of gravel and dirt. She could hear the snap of rope and the splintering of wood, followed by the hurried trample of hooves. One of the horses had broken free. Another crack of thunder filled the air. There was black powder on the wind. The darkness of the interior was filled with the whispered sounds of desperate prayers. Lenora regained her bearings. So much for a dull journey. "What was that?" asked the doctor. He felt around the compartment for his glasses. She hissed him into silence. "Stay quiet," she said. She tried to unfasten the flounce of her dress. The damn thing would not budge. She started ripping it instead. "We are under attack," she continued calmly. "Just do as I say, and we'll be all right." There were voices outside. It was hard to distinguish their words or their language, but it was clear that they were getting closer. They were approaching from all around. Her Hartman cursed. The priest prayed fervently. She could just make out the glint of the doctor's glasses in the darkness as he placed them back on his nose. "What do you need us to do?" he whispered. His calmness surprised her somewhat. She ripped the last of the skirts away. The remains of it were bundled on her seat like the skin of a snake. "Relax, Father," she said to the priest. "A woman in trousers isn't the worst thing you'll see today." A flutter of orange light drifted through one of the blinds. It seemed that their attackers were brandishing torches. "Highwaymen, brigands, thieves," hissed Herr Hartmann. He was now clutching the handhold with both hands, for letting go would mean sliding to the right side of the coach. The distant flicker of light shone off his sweaty face. "We should have hired escorts." "Stay calm," she said. The silver head of her cane glinted as she tested its weight. Hopefully it would not jam this time. "Hold this," she said to the doctor, handing it to him. She busied herself with rearranging her mass of jet black hair. This was not the time for fashion, and some of these pins would come in handy. The priest prayed harder, syllables stumbling over one another. Somewhere out there a horse whinnied in agony. She lifted a blind on the right side of the coach, the side where the torchlight was coming from. Because the coach was leaning to that side, she could only make out 3 pairs of legs trudging out of the trees towards them. She could also make out the glint of steel. She closed the blind and clambered over the others to peer out the left side, the side which was pitched upwards. This revealed a strange sight in the darkness. Herr Hartmann gave a cry of terror as he beheld a face pressed up to the glass, bloody and distorted. She hissed him into silence. "Signor Verde," she said. It was the face of their melomanic driver. "Help me," she said. Herr Hartmann and the doctor helped her push against the door. The angle, the confined space, and the dead weight on the door rendered their efforts fruitless. The approaching voices grew louder. The priest kept praying, his eyes tightly shut. "Come out," said a voice outside. They chose English as their weapon. "Come out!" "What do we do?" asked Hartmann. "Cooperate," said the doctor meekly. "We cannot fight our way out." He sighed heavily. "I have expensive equipment in my luggage. Perhaps we can barter for our lives with those. Medication? I have heard that such lowlives often suffer from dipsomania," said Hartmann. The priest kept praying. "I'm not that kind of doctor, I'm afraid, my friend. All I can offer them is yourselves," she said. She took the cane from the doctor. She clambered back down to the right side of the coach again. Her right hand found the grip of a short knife. The steel blade glinted with the reflected brightness of the torchlight that infiltrated the cabin. "They have us surrounded and likely outnumbered. We're entirely at their mercy. Everything that was strapped to the roof of this vehicle is theirs. What is the logic in offering them what they already have?" The doctor eyed the blade. "Mademoiselle, you're not intending on fighting them, are you?" They were interrupted by a knock on the coach roof. 3 knocks, incessant, loud. This halted even the prayers. "Send out the churchman," said the voice belonging to that knock. "Come out, now." This last word was punctuated by a slap on the coach's bodywork. Something growled and barked. They all glanced at the priest. The weak light that cut through the gloom shone off his wide eyes. He breathed heavily. Slowly, the man shook his head. "Come out," the voice insisted. There was a distinct smell of smoke. "Come out or burn." "Gentlemen," hissed the woman. She beckoned them closer. "Listen carefully." They had lifted the late coachman from the left side door and smashed the lock. Due to the angle at which their means of transport had come to rest, one could not egress to the right side, unless one broke through the window and crawled through the shards of glass. It seemed like an absurd plan to Father Lambert Hayes, but better a woman attempts it. What a queer woman she was. Black hair, pale face, ghostly blue eyes. A creature of sin. He shuddered as he clambered out of the coach. His dark thoughts would be the end of him, he thought. This was punishment for his reluctance to take the task. He had told them no, but they had used his ambition against him. "Do this and we will whisper words of promotion and favor to the Archbishop. Think of it. You could be the one to cleanse Balar of sin. It is an important parish. We will speak your name with praise, Father Hayes. You will be back in Rome before you know it." He made the sign of the sun as he took in the scene around him. There was a makeshift fire at the head of the coach. A fire and 3 dead horses, no more than dark masses on the dusty track that wound between the trees. The 4th must have bolted. There were specks of snow drifting through the cold wind, a wind that stoked the fire and whipped smoke into ghostly wisps. Father Hayes' eyes watered as he looked about, trying to make sense of the scene. 7 assailants, a hound, and the dark woods behind them. They were darkly dressed, their faces covered with black bandanas and tricorn hats. 2 carried rifles, 4 swords, and the last strained to hold the leash of a dog. The beast was foaming at the mouth, its eyes fixed on him. It sent ice through his veins. What a horrible animal, he thought. He had never got on with dogs. They always hated him. Sinful creatures. It growled and barked as he clambered down. One of the swordsmen practically pulled him from the edge of the coach and onto the soil. The leaf-covered ground was soft. It gave slightly underfoot, cold moisture seeping into his shoes. Strange how this might have been something worth complaining about mere moments ago. The light Lord tested all in time, especially those who spent too long in comfort. He cried out as he felt cold steel on the small of his back. Ah, another test. His eyes closed. The after-image of the blazing torch stayed upon the darkness of his lids. "Lord, I have been ever faithful, ever loyal." He prayed silently, for the blade at his back did not seem patient. "I have spread thine word, and I have done thine deeds. Have I not deserved another chance? We are all unworthy, but have I not shown to be the exception?" He was ushered forward as another occupant of the coach was led out. The rotund figure of Herr Hartmann clambered out with some difficulty, muttering curses in his native tongue. He was followed by the Englishman with his unkempt hair. Another scientist. Godless fools, likely the reason for their current predicament. He knew that he shouldn't have refused the deacon's offer of an escort. The man with the dagger at his back was breathing heavily. Was it fear or mere exertion? Father Hayes craned his neck to see. No, those dark eyes were as dead as the night. "Is that all of you?" he asked, his breath streaming as it escaped his mask. How swiftly things fall apart. "Yes," muttered the Englishman. Father Hayes yelped as he was pushed forward. "Move," the man barked. In his haste to comply, he lost his footing on the uneven ground and went sprawling in the dirt. Something wet and clammy seeped into a trouser leg. Mud? The dog barked savagely. Rough hands took him under the arms and lifted him to his feet. 2 assailants, tall, slender, and stony-eyed. They smelled of leather and sweat. One of them seemed to be missing an eye. He looked down at himself. Not mud, horse blood, still warm, had marked his pants. Some distant part of him wondered how he would get the stain out. The assailants huddled closer, a man with Dr. Shaw, another with Herr Hartmann. The rest were around him. Still the dog barked. It pulled at its lead, front legs off the ground, saliva dangling from its mouth in long white strings. Its glittering eyes were trained on him. Every bark, every lunge sent ice surging through his gut. "Oh, don't worry about him, Padre," said one of the men. "Worry about us." What do you want?" he choked. "I have no money." One of them ripped the pendant off his neck. The golden chain had cut into his skin with the force of the pull. The perpetrator held it up, the golden sun reflecting the glare by the fire. "Doubt that," he said. "Not the pendant, Lord, not the pendant. It was entrusted to me by my superior. Such a holy thing, a precious thing. How could I ever replace it? I'm sorry, your eminence, your holiness, but some common thief ripped it from me. Here, look, a scar to prove it." He glared at the man. The gold of the pendant shone in his smiling eyes. He made a show of slipping it into his pocket. "We're not here to rob you," said the one-eyed assailant. His voice was soft and barely above a whisper. One could hardly hear him over the crackling of the fire. Glass shattered in the coach. "She better hurry. Curse that woman." "The evidence is against you there, sir," said the Englishman. The one-eyed man stepped closer to Father Hayes, close enough for him to feel the man's breath escape through the mask. The firelight lit the pink cavity of his empty eye socket. The remaining one was light brown and watery, almost like a goat's eye. He looked upon him with an expression that said he was bored with the whole affair. "Are you Father Lambert Hayes of the Diocese of Inquiry?" he asked in his ghostly whisper. He met the man's eye and tried to hold his gaze. His knees were trembling. "Lord, let me show them courage." "I am." The other men, other than the one-eyed man, exchanged glances, not looks of surprise. "Then I am very sorry, Father," the one-eyed man continued. He drew his sword. Metal rang. The dog barked. The sound of it echoed back from the empty trees around them. The fire crackled. Something crunched. "Now look here," said the Englishman. "I demand to know the meaning of this. You cannot—" "Shut up," said the other assailant. He put a dagger to the Englishman's throat. "Not another word." The one-eyed man placed the blade of his sword on Father Hayes' shoulder. "It's not personal, Father," he said. "We're merely fulfilling a contract." The weight of the blade felt red-hot. He squeezed his eyes shut. Another feeling pushed through the fear like a weed through flagstones. Anger. Father Lambert Hayes, the rising star. Father Lambert Hayes, the promising young priest who would be going places. Father Lambert Hayes, who was only supposed to do one small errand before promotion beckoned. Here he was, about to die in the middle of nowhere at the hands of black-clad hooligans. That is when he heard it. Above the barking, the crackling, and the pounding of his heart, Father Hayes heard something else, a faint whistle and a wet thud. He opened his eyes to see one of the men behind one eye fall to his knees. He was reaching back, trying to pull something out of his back. He cried out, a cry that ended as a burble. Blood splattered up from his mask and across one eye. At last, that damned woman. There was a stunned moment when all present stared in astonishment, a moment that was shattered by another whistle and a thud. This one against the side of the stricken coach. Crossbow quarrels. Spots of light flashed amid the darkness of the trees. Iron balls flipped through the air. Bullets. They came from among the trees. It couldn't have been the woman's doing. "Take cover!" one of the assailants shouted. Shouts sprang up from the woods. Somewhere in the darkness, a torch blazed into life. Men were rushing towards them. These were clad in dirty clothes and brandished clubs, crossbows, rifles, and rusty blades. Father Hayes' head spun. What was going on? Before he could make sense of things, a hand jerked at his shoulder. He cried out. "Make haste," said Hartmann. The large man pulled him by the arm as everyone scattered. The assassins took cover behind the trees. The man holding the dog took a bolt in the arm and dropped the leash. The beast, who could not care who was attacking whom, sprang towards its prey, Father Hayes. "Light, protect me," he heard himself shout. A loud pop sounded somewhere near the coach, and the beast fell over itself, motionless. "Make haste," said Herr Hartmann, pulling him away. The man's grip on his arm stiffened suddenly, painfully. Father Hayes looked up at him and saw that his eyes were wide. A bullet had taken him in the neck. His collar grew dark with blood. Pink bubbles formed on the side of his open mouth. His last words lost in a gurgle. Lenora crouched in the lopsided coach and listened. Steel sang in the only way sharp steel could. "We are merely fulfilling a contract," said a soft voice. These clearly weren't mere highwaymen. These were assassins, she reasoned. If they were here for her, they would know not to give anyone a chance to talk things out. Not here for her. Small comforts. Smoke stung her eyes and clawed at her throat. Her leather gloves and her specialized undergarments had protected her from the worst of the glass, but she still managed to pick up a nasty cut along her right forearm. She could feel the warm trickle of blood bead and run to her elbow as she prepared her equipment. There would be no time to rummage in her luggage. She had to make do with her throwing knives, her short steel, and she moved her gloved hands along the cane, searching for the hidden latch. She twisted the silver lynx head and winced at the click. 2 pellets fell from its open mouth, 1 lead, 1 silver. They would have to do. She swiftly reconfigured the walking stick into its alternative function, just as she had done many times before. She hoped it would not jam this time. Gunpowder cartridge ready. Sights adjusted. Lead pellet loaded. She peered over the stricken coach. It was between her and the others. 7 assassins dressed in black. 1 was standing right in front of the priest. The dog barked. She rested the shaft of her makeshift rifle along the body of the coach. She did not have a clear line of sight on most of them thanks to the 3 hostages. Damn them. She adjusted her aim and came to rest on one of the men standing towards the back of the group. There was only 1 shot. Better make it count. Her gloved finger found the trigger. She tried to quieten her thundering heart by focusing on the task at hand. Distance, wind direction, angle, 1 shot. She heard the barking of the dog and the crackling of the fire. The wind rustled through the trees. Branches groaned. She held her breath and a twig snapped somewhere in the darkness of the woods. She hesitated. The man she was aiming at fell to his knees, calling out. Muzzles flared amid the trees. Bullets and crossbow quarrels fell through the air. Movement amid the trees caught her eye. A volley of crossbow bolts flew out of the darkness. They were not expertly aimed, and some of them bounced off tree trunks, only to tumble uselessly into the undergrowth, who still used crossbows. Splinters flew as a few rifle bullets hit trees and the side of the coach. These new attackers certainly lacked skill. The assassins scattered. One of them shouted to take cover. Dr. Shaw ducked for cover. Her Hartman had the presence of mind to pull the priest away. The dog was bearing down on them. She held her breath again, sighted it, and pulled the trigger. The hound fell. What a waste of ammunition. Dr. Shaw had made it to the cover of the coach beside her. She ducked back down. "Good evening, doctor," she breathed as she pulled a throwing knife from the ribbing of her corset. He was breathing heavily, his glasses askew. "I don't understand," he wheezed. They both heard the priest cry out. A quick glance over the coach revealed that her Hartman was down. The big man was clutching at his neck. The priest watched him with a look of abject terror, standing perfectly still in the middle of the fray. The bolts and bullets seemed to have relented for a moment. Behind the priest, assassins and new attackers were engaging in hand-to-hand combat. The torch had been dropped and was steadily spluttering out in a damp spot slightly up the road. "Run, father!" she shouted. The priest looked up at her, his wide eyes unseeing. Behind him, a dirty bandit was running at him, club raised. What was it, less than 10 meters? Easy. The knife sliced through the air, tumbling end over end, narrowly missing the priest's head and embedding itself in the attacker's chest. He crumpled to the ground, club flying. "Good throw," said Dr. Shaw, adjusting his glasses. The priest looked at the newly dead man and then back at them. "Run!" they shouted in unison. He scrambled towards them. "I was aiming for his face," she said as they ducked back down. The clash of metal rang in the air. 2 rifle shots, like the crack of thunder, echoed. Men screamed. The fire crackled. The priest half ran, half tumbled in next to them. Somewhere amid the chaos, someone shouted, "Kill the damned priest!" "You are popular this evening," she said as she readied another knife. The priest frowned at her and made the sign of the sun. "What do we do?" asked Shaw. Lenora glanced around. Most of the action was happening on the other side of the coach. Here, on their side, there was the bumpy road and more dark forest beyond. She nodded towards it. "There. Our best bet is to make a run for it." "Into the wilderness?" asked the priest. He reached for his pendant, but his hand only clutched his bare tunic. "The Holy Sun," he said, his eyes wide again. "I cannot leave it. It is a gift from the High Illuminated himself." "I dare say he will forgive you, father," she said. She glanced over the coach, only to duck back down again, narrowly avoiding an oncoming crossbow bolt. "I'll cover you," she said. "You two run as far and as fast as you can. Do not stop for anyone." She placed the throwing knife in her left hand and readied her short steel in her right. "And please, doctor, do not run in a straight line." He looked at her, the flames at the head of the coach reflecting in his glasses. "And you, mademoiselle?" She spun the throwing knife. Not my time. Go. To his credit, the doctor did as he was told. He shot to his feet and dragged the priest behind him. The holy man protested. Stop. Someone shouted at them. Lenora popped up and saw an assassin leveling a rifle at the duo. There was a split second where his eyes left their mark and found her. The rifle barrel moved towards her. In that split second, the throwing knife cut through the air and caught him in the neck. The muzzle flashed, and she felt a streak of pain streak across her cheek. She fell back down to cover and touched her face with a gloved hand. Blood. Only a graze. She had had worse. The exchange had given the doctor the chance to scramble across the dirt road. There he was, lenses glinting. He was pointing towards her. Her ears were still ringing from the gunshot. She blinked. No, he was not pointing towards her. She followed his gesture in time to see a pair of legs and shiny shoes disappear around the back of the coach, crawling. The priest. Go, she shouted at the doctor. I'll get him. She could not hear his reply. To crawl on your hands and knees through the filth. What an indignity. Father Hayes coughed. The smoke would kill him. Never mind the hail of bolts and bullets. The smoke would do him in. As long as he kept low. Yes, that was key. Head down, and the barbarian would be too busy hacking at each other to notice him. He started as his hand found foreign fingers in the dirt. It belonged to a fallen attacker. This one was dressed in the dirtiest rags he had ever seen. Not that his attire mattered. What mattered was that the hand was moving, clutching at the dirt. The man was still alive, grunting, choking. He clutched at his neck where the woman's dagger had pierced him. His eyes were wide, staring unseeingly at the blackness of the night sky. May the light Lord guide your soul to the hereafter, you scum. There was nothing to be done. Had the situation been reversed, the man would surely have killed him. Father Hayes kept crawling. He was shaking. Cold fear wrapped itself around him. On his hands and knees in the dirt, clashing swords rang. Another gunshot. Somewhere beyond all of this an animal howled, a wolf perhaps. It was a night of blood and beasts. No place for the likes of him. Lord, I have been ever loyal, ever faithful. Let me survive this. Let me live, and I will serve you in better ways. Make me your instrument, please. I beg you, let me live. He flinched as someone ran past, kicking up mud. They did not notice him, for he was no better than a dirt-streaked corpse. It must be here somewhere. The one that pocketed it must be among the fallen. Was he not the first to be struck? The orange light of the fire cast strange shadows upon the nascent battlefield. It was hard to distinguish irregularities in the turf from the bodies. It seemed as if the latest band of ambushers, while they clearly outnumbered the first batch, were being overpowered. He had to crawl across a fallen brigand befouled by tattoos, anchors, whales, and other nautical elements, and marked with scars. His cruel face was frozen in an expression of surprise. The fallen numbered too many for Father Hayes to offer prayers for all. This would have to wait. He had something more valuable to find. His shaking limbs moved him forward. Every part urged him to get up and run. But there was one thing he could not leave without. Without it, he was as good as dead anyway. He looked up at the most unusual sound, something between a scream and a roar. Before he could pinpoint it, however, the glint of gold caught his eye. There it is. It was dangling from a hand, a body draped across another body. The intricate golden sun spun slightly. He crawled faster. "Father!" someone shouted. It sounded like the woman. He could not stop now. He was almost there. A trembling hand reached out. His arm ached. His knees ached. The line across the back of his neck burned with sweat. There. His fingers hooked around the golden chain, and he pulled it with all his might. Dead fingers held. He pulled. It dawned on him that the owner of the hand was draped across the rotund figure of the German. He stopped pulling. Not just some German, but Frederick Hartmann, the man who had saved his life. "Father!" He pulled again. Almost. Cold steel sank into his back. Fire spread through his body. "No." He coughed. A single breath was agony. He felt the metal in him, the sting of the twisting tug, the scraping of the blade against bone. He felt it pull out, the burning relief of it, and the coldness that followed. The pain spread through his legs, his arms, his torso. It was just a scratch, just a sting. He was alive. He kept pulling on the chain, the sensation in his arm ebbing away, becoming distant. A strange wetness overtook him, as if he was slowly sinking into a warm body of water, a wetness within and without. He coughed as it filled his mouth. Blood. Spots of light burst into his vision. He tried to gasp, but there was only blood. thick and warm. The spot spread, blinding him. There was only darkness. "I've got him," shouted the assassin as he pulled his blade from the priest's back. Blood dripped from the point of it. He looked up to see if any of his fellows acknowledged his deed. Instead, he saw a flash of steel flint out of the darkness. Something sharp caught him in the chest. His bloodied blade hit the ground before he did. "Damn it," said Lenora as she took cover between the bodies. She flipped the priest over. He stared blankly into the night. Dead. She scrambled over the newly dead assassin and pulled her knife out of him. As she wiped it on his coat, she noticed something glinting in the muck. Her gloved fingers picked out the little golden sun. Such fatal foolishness for a mere trinket. She glanced up to assess the fight. Their first lot of attackers, the assassins, seemed to be holding their own against the second lot, no more than common bandits. There were many of the latter, though many had fallen by now. The coach bonfire revealed at least 3 assassins and 11 bandits. 1 or 2 of the latter seemed to be on the verge of making a run for it. A ragged man that was more beard than brawn had dropped his cleaver and scrambled into the trees. "What a mess," she said under her breath. She scrambled to her feet. As she did so, one of the wavering bandits noticed her and made several cautious steps in her direction. Blood covered his ragged coat. He did not seem to be moving with any impairment, so she reasoned that it was not his blood. He raised his axe, the kind made for chopping wood and not through shields, but the edge looked keen enough for that not to matter. He raised it at her. All the reluctance suddenly drained out of him upon seeing a woman, an easy mark as far as he was likely concerned. She sighed and slid the throwing knife back into her clothing. They were easily avoided once the element of surprise had gone. She tested the grip of her short sword in the other hand, spinning it. Bandit's eyes glinted with the firelight as he gingerly stepped across a fallen comrade. He dared not break eye contact. She carefully stepped away from the fallen priest and his dead killer. Her breath hissed through her parted lips. Steady, steady. He made to step forward, axe over his head, mouth twisted in a bloodthirsty snarl. In a split second, she made ready to sidestep his overhead swing, but something was off. Unexpected movement in her peripheral vision made her flinch. In that split second, something large, dark, and heavy leapt into attack, plucking the bandit from the air. His yelp of surprise was suddenly cut off as the thing crumpled him into the ground. Claws rent flesh, teeth cracked into bone, blood sprayed. She did not stay to understand it. She turned on her heel and leapt over the bodies and debris. She made it back behind the coach, snapped up her walking cane and ran across the road. The sound of fighting continued behind her. She made it to the trees and spotted the glint of the doctor's spectacles. He had been hiding behind a tree. She hid behind a trunk next to his, put her back to it, and sunk to her haunches. "The priest?" he hissed. She shook her head, breathing hard. "It's just the 2 of us, Doctor." A strange roar sounded amid the fighting. "What on earth?" The doctor trailed off. He peered around his tree, frowning towards the fire. She snapped open the loading mechanism in her cane. She had 1 more shot. Silver pellet only. "Just give me a second," she said. She squeezed her eyes shut and willed herself to calm down, to steady her breathing, to slow her pounding heart, to hear. Another roar. Someone screamed. Gunfire. A single shot, followed by another scream. She focused on the roar. She initially thought it was a bear. It was the right size and the fur. The fur was dark and matted. No, not a bear. That roar. That smell. She finally regained her composure. Breath steady, heart calmer. There was that roar again. Her eyes snapped open. She knew that sound, the dark and familiar tones of it. "There's, an animal," she heard the doctor say. My, doctor," she said. "One of us has acquired a shadow." She finished loading the cane and stood. She looked over at the doctor. He was pale. His old eyes were wide behind his glinting glasses. "Stay low," she said. "I need to put it down." "What? You can't be serious." "Unless you want to run all the way to Balar, Doctor." She glanced towards the burning coach. There, a dark shape beyond the flames was making quick work of the survivors, assassins and bandits alike. She checked her cane. 1 silver pellet. It would have to do. "It will have our scent. Running won't help." "I don't understand," he said. "Just stay low." She ducked around the tree and before he could utter another word ran off towards the commotion. Speed is everything. Hesitation is death, at least as far as this thing was concerned. How long had it been since she saw one last? Was it Paris? She shuddered at the thought as she ran. Let's not repeat that incident, shall we? The fire was starting to die. Smoke curled among the trees. Moonlight caught on the lamps in the dirt. Bodies. Someone screamed amid the trees. One of the survivors, a bandit, judging by his ragged attire, ran in her direction. She guessed that he was running away from the creature more than he was running to attack her, but she couldn't take any chances. A throwing knife caught him in the neck, and he went down without a sound. She did not stop to collect it. Such tiny weapons would be no use now. She leapt across the dead horses, smoke stinging her eyes that were rapidly adjusting to the moonlight. There it was, the creature, tearing into a person. Bandit or assassin, it mattered little now. It was huge, bear-sized with mottled black fur. Sharp claws like honed daggers extended from its front paws. Its face, which was a mottled mess of matted fur and bits of bone, was splattered with gore. It had a long muzzle like that of a wolf or some malformed hound. Its eyes were black and wet, rolling in its sockets with the euphoria of the hunt. Eyes which stopped rolling as it settled on her, pupils dilating. With a shake of its head, it threw whatever body part it had been gnawing on into the trees. Steady, steady, one shot, make it count. The creature turned its body so that it was facing her. Muscles rippled beneath the mottled fur. Some of it was scarred and torn away by wounds old and new. Where the fur was missing, a pale dead hide showed. No blood, for Bargeist did not bleed. Its ugly head focused on her, and, without a moment's hesitation, it launched itself at her, heavy paws pounding at the soft earth. Heart pounding, she dropped to one knee, shouldered the cane, and took aim. The creature was closing fast. 10 meters, 7 meters, 5 meters. It roared, jaws wide, dead tongue lolling. She pulled the trigger. Her aim was true, and the silver pellet struck it in its soft palate. Its steady gait faltered, a front paw folding in under itself, and it half slid, half tumbled towards her. She dropped the cane and tumbled out of the way, feeling the wind off of the creature as it barreled past and crashed into the stricken coach. She pushed herself halfway off the ground and spat a mouthful of dirt. She glanced around. All was still except the spluttering of the dying fire. The smell of smoke and blood filled her nostrils. She could not hear or see anyone else. The creature had dispatched them all. "Mademoiselle," came a distant call. The doctor. "Here," she shouted as she pushed herself up to standing. She brushed herself off and pulled a dead leaf from her collar. The doctor picked his way through the carnage. "You're alive? I thought—" He trailed off as he spotted the dead creature folded in on itself against the side of the coach. Clumps of black fur were slowing off of it, its lumpy shape deforming. "It's the silver," she said, drawing up beside the old man. "It can't handle it." She glanced about for any indication of more attackers or, a light forbid, more monsters. "Rather unusual for it to be out here, don't you think?" The doctor struggled for words as he squinted at the creature. "Unusual is the word." She started turning over bodies, looking for her throwing knives. "It's just that I heard that this Balar used to be a mining town. Silver mines, no less. If I were a thing like that," here she pointed with her short blade, "I would steer clear." Indeed," said the doctor. Might I ask, what is it? Some kind of mutated bear? Wolf?" "A Bargeist," she said in a matter-of-fact tone. "You usually find them around abandoned grave sites, unsanctioned ground in particular." She pulled her cane from under a turned-up body. It had an awful bend in it halfway up the shaft. "Damn it. It's, decomposing," he said. The creature was becoming less and less. Fur disintegrated, bone turned to dust. The putrid smell of death filled the air. "It's the silver, as I said. Come, doctor, let's not linger. We don't know what else is in these woods." The bodies," he began. "Should we not—" She sighed as she rummaged through the fallen luggage. Some of it appeared to have survived the fire and the crash. "With respect, doctor, it is best to leave them. Most things would rather scavenge than hunt." Scavenge? His face was a picture of horror as her meaning dawned on him. "We cannot wander off into the wilderness," she said. "We will become hopelessly lost. Our best bet is to skirt the road just within the tree line. This way we could hide should anyone come looking for travelers." And so they walked, side by side, carrying their battered belongings. Only the sparse moonlight revealed the way ahead, the trees casting long shadows, the wind making strange sounds. They had left the fire and the smoke behind, but they could still smell it on their clothes, that and sweat and blood. They walked in silence, looking up at every strange sound on the wind, or jumped at every strange shape in the shadows. Weary legs, weary hearts. "There is no one out here," said the doctor eventually. "Lucky for us," she said. "Why do you think they were after the priest?" Leaves crunched underfoot. Did they not say something about him being part of the, what was it now, something inquiry? She asked. Her eyes darted along the tree line. Nothing. Diocese of Inquiry, said the doctor. He was huffing and puffing as he went. Less conspicuous than saying the Inquisition. Ah, of course, she said. With them I am familiar. Strange. Father Hayes did not seem the type. There is a type? She snorted. It's been many years, but the last inquisitor I met had a more, how do you say, apocalyptic bent. He saw sin and depravity everywhere and did not miss an opportunity to point it out. All rather intense. Our late companion was reserved. Yes, said the doctor. He thought about this for a moment. If I may say, mademoiselle, your English is flawless. I cannot detect the slightest accent. Your French is not bad for an Englishman, she countered. Why are Englishmen always surprised when someone else can speak their language? Your empire spread it well enough. Ah, quite, he said. I meant no offense. I know. Somewhere in the darkness a wolf howled. Both of them hesitated briefly before taking another step. The sound had come from far away, and no other sounds followed. They continued. Back to our point, said the doctor. Are you implying that they were after this man because he was part of the Inquisition? She shrugged. Likely. They didn't seem interested in the rest of us. If it wasn't for the timely intervention of the bandits, perhaps they would have let us go. You think so? She nodded. They covered their faces and took great care not to name each other. As professional as they come. They had no reason to kill us. I don't know, it hardly matters now. What kind of place is this Balar? Asked the doctor. The question hung in the air as they walked. Dry leaves crunched. Tree branches creaked. The wind howled. The creature, the doctor began. He seemed to wrestle with words. Is dead, she said. Do not dwell on it, doctor. It's perhaps the last inexplicable thing you will see in your life. Things like that remain in the shadows. Shadows which your world of science is shrinking. Eventually there will be no shadows and such things will only be stories. The doctor thought about this for a while. He swapped his leather bag to his other hand. Some of his equipment did not survive the crash and the subsequent bonfire. While he bemoaned the loss of tools, another part of him was thankful that this was all he had to carry. I cannot recall what you said in the coach, he said eventually. Why are you going to Balar? She squinted into the gloom. I do not recall fully answering the question, she said. But nevertheless, after what we've been through, I'm searching for someone. Someone I believed long dead. She blinked something from her eye. A letter, that is to say, someone has led me to believe that this person is alive and well in the town of Balar. I was reluctant to, well, it seems like a trick, a trap. Intriguing, said the doctor. Well, for what it's worth, I hope that this is true and you find this person. I, for what it's worth, doctor, hope that it is not, and that I do not. More silent walking. And you, doctor, you have work waiting in the town. Ah, yes, some mogul is interested in my research, he said. He seemed more comfortable on this more familiar ground. A patron of some wealth, as I understand it. He and I have been corresponding for some months, and I believe him to be possessed of intellect and curiosity. Intriguing, she said, copying his earlier utterance. Perhaps he may have information about this person you seek. As I am headed there at this very moment, I am sure that I can make the necessary inquiries and— Thank you, doctor, she said, cutting him off. But the fewer people I involve in my affairs, the better. I see. He adjusted his spectacles with a free hand, and so they continued, finding little common ground in terms of topics of conversation. A cloud drew across the moon and darkened their path. Seeing no alternative, they decided to follow the road for a while. This, at least, would ensure that they did not trip over roots or lose the track. Just when it seemed too dark to move, the moonlight poked through once again. The silvery light revealed sentinel tree trunks on either side of the winding dirt road. The visibility, even as dim as it was, returned a confidence to their stride. All was quiet. No birds, no howling wolves, hardly a breeze to stir the branches. There was only the crunching of their shoes on the dirt track. She glanced around, making sure that they were not being followed or tracked. Her ghostly blue eyes picked out shapes among the trees, no more than shadows or tricks of the sparse light. Most of them at least. As they went, as the tree trunks steadily rolled back like shifting scenery, she could make out solid shapes amid the darkness. "Do not be alarmed, Doctor," she said, keeping her voice level, "but we are being observed." The old man half jumped at this revelation, missing a step. He almost broke out into a run despite his fatigue, but he had the presence of mind to fall back into step next to her. He coughed slightly, embarrassed. He glanced about wildly, spots of moonlight picking out strands of his wild silver hair. Lenora nodded to their right. There, some ways into the trees, were shapes standing among them. Several shapes. Men and women of various sizes and hats and coats. They were little more than dark outlines in the gloom, but there was no mistaking them. Not a one of them moved. They simply stood, watching. One could almost perceive the faint gleam of their eyes. "More bandits?" hissed the doctor. He seemed on the verge of running again. "Peace, Doctor," she said. "They pose no threat. Not in the corporeal sense, at least." He adjusted his glasses. "What, you mean they're ghosts?" "Not entirely," she said. She could not help a slight smile from manifesting. "They are called many things. Grey men, observers, dark watchers, and many more. You find them all throughout the world. They usually appear near places of power, good or evil." She shrugged. "All they do is watch. No one knows why." The doctor stopped and turned towards the watching figures. Moonlight glinted off his glasses. "It does not make any sense," he said under his breath. He raised one hand and waved. "Good evening," he shouted. The figures did not respond. They simply stood there, watching. As the moonlight shifted, their dark shapes melded into the shadows of the forest. They were gone. "I have lost my senses," he said, shaking his head. She kept walking. He ran to catch up. "If you ask me, Doctor, I would say that you came to your senses. You notice one thing and soon it all becomes obvious. We only see what we want to see. But tonight you were forced to see something strange." "The Bargeist?" "Indeed. Perhaps the world will seem different to you now," she said. "Or perhaps you will forget all this when you are in your lab or poring over your books, and you will go back to the way you were before. That would be for the best." The doctor seemed to contemplate this for a while. They walked for a good 10 minutes or so before the doctor spoke again. "There are stories," he said. His voice was far off and quiet. "Rumors, legends, apocryphal tales that make their rounds in the shadows." He let this hang in the air for a moment. "As a man of science, well, I did not put stock in such things. Fantasy. Nonsense. But still, I've heard them, these stories. They tell of a secretive group of hunters, sanguis sigillum, hunters of improbable creatures, monsters, for lack of a better word, madness, really. I mean, who believes in such things?" He gave a slight chuckle and glanced at the trees. "I certainly didn't," he trailed off. "Well, my point is that these tales do not seem so outlandish now." She kept walking. "Why do you mention it, Doctor?" She knew where this was going. There was no helping it. "If you don't mind me saying, you seem comfortable with the situation. You held your nerve when he stumbled over the word. "We were attacked. Certainly better than the rest of us. But when that thing, the Bargeist," she said. "Quite. You seemed, professional." She shrugged. "Anything else was of no use to us." The doctor cleared his throat. "Well, there is tell of a particular hunter, a woman of all things, a woman of singular talents, ranging from the martial to the intellectual, polyglot, chameleon." "It really sounds like a story, Doctor," she said. "All those qualities in a mere woman, as you put it." Quite," he said. He ran his fingers through his wild hair. It did nothing but dishevel it further. "I heard this story and several versions of it when I spent a summer in Paris many years ago with my, dear friend." He cleared his throat. "A gothic tale of a chase along the Seine involving a shadow man and 3 innocent victims. This young woman chased the entity down and made short work of it." She frowned. "Outlandish indeed," she said. "The woman made use of throwing knives and," he pointed to her bent walking stick, "a lynx-headed cane. She was said to have the eyes of the most striking blue. It does not take a leap of imagination to realize all of this sounds very much like you, mademoiselle." She smiled at him. Tell me, Doctor, when was this strange occurrence said to have taken place? He hesitated. That is the odd part. It was over 20-odd years ago. The talented woman in the story is said to be young. Late 20s, early 30s maybe. If you don't mind me saying, mademoiselle, you look to be in this age range, presently, that is. Her smile widened. Well, there you have it. Could not have been me. They walked on for a while again in strained silence. What did they call her? She asked. The heroine in this gothic tale? I believe they called her Midnight on account of her dark hair. But you're probably right, it couldn't have been you. Of course. They crested a rise in the track and saw a moon-bathed valley stretch out in front of them. Roof tiles glinted in the moonlight. A handful of windows glowed with candlelight. At last, she said, civilization. Balar at last. They both stopped for a moment to take in the view and to catch their breath. I meant to thank you, said the doctor, for saving my life and for trying to save the others. I'm afraid that I am of no use in such... Don't mention it, she said, and I mean that quite literally. I wish to remain largely fictional for the time being. She winked at him. He blinked at this, things sliding into place in his mind's eye. Of course. Perhaps we will meet again after we get settled. Perhaps you can help me understand a few things. Perhaps, she said. However, I do not intend to stay long. Together they followed the downhill path into Balar, the slope aiding their tired legs. The dark track became a cobbled road, and soon they were walking past fences and farmhouses. These in turn gave way to narrower streets and multi-level structures. Somewhere in the darkness a cat mewed. It also sounded as if a woman was crying somewhere, but neither of them could pinpoint exactly where the sound came from. Perhaps it was merely another cat. Take care, Doctor, she said, once they made it to the town square. A clock tower loomed high above on one side, its hands nearly meeting at the 12. Morton, please, he spluttered. Morton Shaw. I believe we might have left formalities out there in the woods. He held out his hand. Midnight, she said, shaking his. Well then, take care, Morton. The things we saw and experienced on the road are inauspicious. I will, he said. They said their final goodbyes and went in different directions. He meandered down the street, squinting at the signs. She, walking with sure strides, bright eyes scanning the gloom. Oh, Morton, she shouted. He turned back. Keep that pen of yours handy, she said. You never know when you might need some silver. Alright, so that was Midnight. It is probably the most action-packed of the stories. They're not all like this. Some of them are more slow burn, definitely more horror. Thank you for listening. Find this and 12 other stories in the Curse of Balar. There are links in the description. I would appreciate a like or share and maybe a follow or two on any of the links below. I also have other works available. If horror isn't your thing, perhaps give The Bright Report a try. It's the exact opposite of Balar, a light-hearted parody of news stories and nonsense. My little mental breakdown. Or if you want something chunky, may I humbly suggest The Silent Symphony, my personal favorite. A story about art, love, and oppression. There's a sequel in the works. As for Balar, there are 2 more short stories on the way, followed by a full-length novel as the 4th installment. There is a solution to the mystery. I know some readers have said that they wanted more answers. Please be patient. It won't all be revealed in the first of 4. The clues are there, you just don't know they're clues yet. The intention is partly to create a sense of revelation once you finish the entire series and return again. Just trust the story. I'm putting everything into the payoff. Hopefully those that have finished the symphony can attest to that. That being said, as a thank you to those who've made it this far into the video, let me give you some more clues. Now, this won't make any sense if you haven't read any of the stories yet, so maybe come back to this segment later. Also, I know there are too many characters, so I'll upload a character list on my website. Again, links in the description. So here we go. Number 1. Several characters suffer from the Curse of Balar. Yes, it is a thing. These include the elders of the Vanara, the gypsy people who make a small appearance in this installment, and Soren Moreau, among others. The patron wants all the benefits of the curse, but none of the downsides. This is a massive clue, I promise you. Number 2. There are several factions at play in town. The church Sanguis Sigillum, the Venora, the Doubles, the Patron, and the Brood. This can be confusing, but trust that things will become clear as they become important. Number 3. Everything the Patron is busy with is important to the bigger mystery, that is. There are a lot of clues in that story, all the dots but few connections. I will say that the lion mural and the term squaring the circle is significant to a particularly defunct precursor to chemistry. Number 4. The servants moving the carved stones in the first story set off a chain of events. Number 5. The Saint House is important. Number 6. Not so much as a clue, more as a reassurance. Soren and Midnight, the lady in this story, are the main protagonists of the novel. Iris, the patron, the man in gold, who you haven't seen yet, and the Saint family are also important for reasons that will become clear. Don't worry about keeping track of every character. Instead, think of each story as a standalone episode in an anthology TV series. The depth is there and rewarded if you want to go that deep, but it shouldn't impede your enjoyment of the story. Trust me, there's an ending. It's not a J.J. Abrams thing. Thank you for watching this far. I hope you found this interesting. I would also very much like to know what you think. Also, I'm open to questions about any of my books or my writing process. You can ask me questions on Goodreads, the comments below, or whatever Twitter is called when you watch this video. Let me know if you have a favorite story or at least a favorite character. Thank you for watching. Until the next installment, goodbye.